Whether you're hospital staff or a first responder, a bus driver, truck driver, or freight train operator, I know you're working harder than ever right now. So thank you. You're making a real difference for people who need you. I want you to know that we see that, and we're standing behind you. Whatever our government can do to support you, to keep you safe, to protect our economy, we're doing everything we can to make it happen. And that includes for northern communities. We're working with partners to reduce travel to northern communities to help protect them from the virus. Today, the Northwest Territories will issue an order to limit non-essential travel into the territory. We support this important step. At the same time, we're focused on ensuring essential goods get to people in these communities. We will continue to work with partners and stakeholders on travel to the north. This past week, we also announced new measures to put more money in people's pockets to get through this uncertain time. This means everything from boosting the Canada Child Benefit to increasing the GST credit to giving people a break from paying back their student loans. We've unveiled a plan to mobilize industry to produce things like masks and ventilators. And to accelerate vital research, $25 million will go to teams across the country working on measures to detect, manage, and reduce the spread of COVID-19. For Canadians who are overseas, we're sending them texts with important information. We've announced new funding to help people borrow up to $5,000 to return to Canada or to cover their needs while waiting to come home. And public servants are working around the clock to help people who are stranded. On that last front, we've continued to make progress in the last few days. Aujourd'hui, j'annonce que notre gouvernement travaille avec des compagnies aériennes canadiennes.
Canadian airlines to make commercial flights more accessible to Canadians who are stranded abroad. We will also be working with other countries to ensure that our airlines have the permission and other logistical measures necessary to take these flights. A first Air Canada flight will leave Morocco this weekend. We are also working with other airline companies to reach similar agreements. We are planning other flights in the coming days, potentially from Peru and Spain, with other countries being announced as soon as possible. A number of factors are being considered when we decide where the flights will leave from. For example, the number of Canadians in a certain place, the closure of the airspace, or the local situation. We cannot necessarily bring everyone back, but we will do as much as we can to help as many Canadians as possible, so that the Canadian government can contact people who need help as soon as possible. Canadians abroad must register with Global Affairs Canada if they have not already done so. You can do that online at voyage.gc.ca. The same public health policies that apply to people entering the country also will apply to those flights. All passengers on those flights will have to self-isolate for 14 days as soon as they return. I also want to remind people that if you have symptoms of COVID-19, you will not be able to take the flight. Our objective is to protect your health and that of people around you. It is therefore essential that everyone do their share.
I can announce that we're working with Canadian Airlines to make commercial flights available for as many Canadians who are stranded as possible. We will also be working with other countries to ensure that our airlines have the permissions and other supports necessary to fly. The first flight is leaving Morocco this weekend and is being operated by Air Canada. We're currently working with other airlines on similar arrangements. And there will be more flights from other locations in the coming days. This potentially includes Peru and Spain. Other countries will be announced as soon as possible. As we make these decisions, factors like the number of Canadians there, airspace closures, and the local situation are being taken into account. Now, we won't be able to reach everyone, but we're going to do our best to help those we can. To make sure we can get information to people as quickly as possible, all Canadians overseas should register with Global Affairs Canada if they've not already done so. You can do this by going online to travel.gc.ca. The same public health policies will apply to these flights as to anyone else who's coming into the country. Everyone on these flights has to isolate for 14 days once they're back. I also want to remind everyone that if you're showing symptoms of COVID-19, you won't be able to board. This is about keeping all Canadians safe, so we need everyone to do their part. On that note, I want to recognize the airlines that are working with us to get travelers home and families reunited. And I especially want to thank the staff, from pilots to air crews, for their professionalism and dedication. During a very difficult time for the industry, when people are worried about their jobs and futures, they're still stepping up to help. This has been a tough week for a lot of Canadians. People are concerned about their health and the economy. And today, on the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, let's not forget that people are worried about how fear can fuel racism, too. So let's be kind to each other. And let's stand up against discrimination wherever you see it. In the days and weeks ahead, as we continue to feel the impacts of this virus, it will be more important than ever to fight against fear, misinformation, and stigma. We must continue to pull together, because in times of need, our strength is defined by how we care for each other, as neighbors, as communities, and as a country. Même pendant la fin de semaine,
even over the weekend, we must all do our part. We have to continue to follow the public health recommendations and limit travel as much as possible. You may want to go to a restaurant with your family or go and see a film with friends, but in order to protect yourselves, we must all make adjustments. And it is especially important that we take care of each other, because it's together that we can come through this difficult period. Thank you very much.
Hi, Prime Minister. Molly Thomas from CTV National News. I saw today that the Foreign Affairs Minister has spoken to officials in Australia, Brazil, Germany, Peru, and Turkey. You mentioned Spain as well. For Canadians that are outside of maybe more populated areas or places that we're talking to, is it safer for them to stay put? They are scared and they're asking us, I mean, should we stay? Should we avoid those airports? Should we avoid places of getting trapped in another country en route?
I think everyone needs to take the best decisions for them. Obviously, if they are not certain they're going to be getting on a flight, they're probably better to stay in place. But Global Affairs Canada will give recommendations like that on various situations. People will need to use their best judgment. We're doing everything we can to help as many people as possible. But as I said, airspace closures that different countries are putting in, logistical challenges, these are things that we're dealing with right now as a world. Évidemment, nous voulons que les Canadiens.
Of course, we want Canadians to do everything they can to remain healthy and safe. They will have to judge based on their own situation whether or not it's a good idea to go to the airport without confirmation. But certainly, Global Affairs will be providing more information to Canadians so that they can make the right choices for themselves and their family.
In Southern Ontario this week, a 51-year-old man lost his life. He wasn't tested for the virus until he was put into ICU. He only came back positive after he had died. I mean, we know that there's community spread. Should we not be testing people beyond just those with travel histories here?
The ramping up of testing is increasing at a tremendous pace. Tens of thousands more people are being tested every single day. We are getting more equipment for testing. We recognize that broad-scale testing is an essential tool in continuing to fight the spread of this disease. And as I said, every single day we are doing far more tests than the day before, and that will continue to ramp up. We
recognize that screening is an essential tool in order to stop the spread of this virus, and that's why every single day we are testing tens of thousands more Canadians, and that will continue to increase every single day. We know that massive testing is one of the ways of protecting Canadians and reducing the spread of the virus.
I wanted to ask about the Emergencies Act. Speed is critical in containing this virus. We've seen what happens when countries wait too long to restrict people's movement. Polite requests only go so far. Why not declare a federal state of emergency now and get ahead of where this is going?
I want to thank the millions upon millions of Canadians who have self-isolated, who are engaged in social distancing. That is the fundamental thing that we all can do and need to do to prevent the spread of this virus. We know that in many global crises or situations, individuals feel powerful to make a difference, powerless to make a difference. In this situation, people can affect their health, the health of their neighbors, by taking straightforward steps to self-isolate wherever possible, and to move and to keep social distancing to a maximum. We have not removed from the table any options. We're looking at a broad array of measures that we can move forward with. At this time, we do not see the Federal Emergencies Act as an essential tool today, but we are continuing to look at the situation, and we'll make decisions based on the best recommendations of science.
And what do you need to see before declaring a federal emergency?
I think the key issue is, are there things that we need to be able to do as a government that we cannot do with the very strong existing regulations that are in place and that our government has as tools? Okay. Évidemment, je veux remercier d'abord les
Begin by
millions
thanking the millions of Canadians who have been following the public health officials' recommendations, who are staying home, self-isolating, and practicing social distancing. This is something that we can all do, not just to address this crisis, but also to protect ourselves and the people around us. Of course, we are looking at the Emergency Measures Act, but we do not feel that it is necessary at this time to invoke it, because we have all the tools that we need to do what is being recommended to us, but it could be an option in future. Radio-Canada, now with respect to those Canadians who want to return through these flights you're organizing, who will be paying for that travel? And will the passengers have to pay? And how can you be sure that they won't overpay? Well, of course, yes, we are working with the airline companies at this time to ensure that what they charge passengers is responsible for this type of rescue flight, and we will be there to help the airlines if need be in order to cover their costs for those flights. But we are expecting that Canadians who have to return to Canada pay for their ticket.
We have worked out we're working out an agreement with airline companies where the government will help to cover extra costs, but we expect Canadians being returned home on these emergency flights to pay a responsible ticket price for their return.
La pandémie semble originer des marchés.
The pandemic seems to originate from live markets in China. Do you think the Canadian government could use its presence at the United Nations to ask that this type of market not exist anymore, and that there be international inspectors sent out to inspect? Well, in the weeks and the months and the years to come, I imagine there will be a great deal of learning with respect to this pandemic, how it happened, and how we can prevent it in future. For the time being, all our efforts are focused on protecting people today and tomorrow, and resolving this situation for the public health situation and Canadians. After that, there will be a great deal of discussion as to how we can prevent a future pandemic.
Prime Minister, you've said it's inevitable that there are going to be Canadians stranded abroad. What is your message to those Canadians who are scared? They're in countries where the medical system is not like it is here in Canada. There are towns under lockdown with heavy military presence. They're afraid they could be stuck there for months. What do you tell them and their families?
First of all, Canada is making consular assistance available, a loan of $5,000, for example, to help them in either buying tickets home or being able to hunker down in place. It is an extremely difficult situation, but the lockdowns of various countries, the limits on air travel, logistical capacities of our airlines means that we are unlikely to be able to bring everyone home. So we're going to ask people to stay safe, to make smart choices, and do the best they can in a situation that is unprecedented, exceptional, and very difficult.
And what's the level of cooperation that you've received from Canadian commercial airlines to try to repatriate Canadians? And as well, what bailout is on the way for them?
I have spoken directly with the heads of Canada's largest airlines over the past days, and I can tell you that they are all in terms of supporting Canadians, in terms of getting people home. There are, of course, limits to what we can all do to rescue everyone, but I can assure you that the airlines have been very positive, thoughtful partners on that, and we recognize that Canada's airline industry has been strong and successful in years past, and will need to be strong and successful once this pandemic follows its course and we come out the other side. We will be there to support airlines and other industries that have been sorely hit by this particular crisis.
Thank you. We'll now go to the phone lines for a few questions. Moderator.
Thank you. Please press star 1 if you have a question. Faites étoile 1 pour toute question. The first question, la première question est de Lina Dib, Presse canadienne. Please go ahead. Your line is now open.
Bonjour, Monsieur Trudeau.
Good morning, Mr. Trudeau. Earlier this week, Mr. Legault was advising Quebecers to stay in their region. Newfoundland is closing off its borders to other Canadians, and the same is being done by the Northwest Territories. Even if you are not at the point where you want to order this sort of thing, will you be recommending to Canadians that they not travel within Canada? We are recommending to Canadians that they not travel anywhere unless it's absolutely essential. We're telling people to stay home, not to go and visit their neighbors. That includes in the United States or in neighboring provinces. People may have important reasons to travel for family or for business, but if people can keep their travel down to a minimum and stay home, that would be the best thing for all of us.
We're asking people to stay home as much as possible, to avoid non-essential travel. And that means not going to see your neighbors if you don't have to. And that applies to the United States, but it also applies to other provinces. We recognize that people have reasons, whether family reasons or work reasons or other important reasons to travel, and they can make those judgments. But as much as possible, people should be staying home. People should be self-isolating with their family members so we can all get through this, and so we can be making sure we're keeping our healthcare professionals and our healthcare system safe and able to handle the capacity.
Thank you. Next question, moderator.
Thank you. Merci. The next question is from Greg Quinn from Market News. Please go ahead. Your line is now open.
Good morning. Bank of Montreal and Scotiabank have said the deficit this year could come in at around $100 billion, about twice the previous record. Have you seen any official figures from government of those kinds of numbers? And do you have any kind of hesitation politically or economically about that kind of figure?
We've heard a wide range of estimates from economists and banks about how bad this is going to get. The only thing they seem to agree on is that it's going to get very bad. Fortunately, Canada is an extremely strong fiscal position. We have one of the lowest debt to GDP ratios, the lowest debt as a factor of the size of our economy of most of our allied countries, and that gives us room to inject money into people's pockets, into the economy as necessary. We will focus on ensuring that Canadians and companies get through this difficult time so that once we're through, we can pick up where we left off and continue to have a strong and prosperous economy. This is what we're focusing on right now, how to bridge Canadians and businesses through this difficult time. We have the capacity to do that, and we will do what is necessary.
Thank you. Last question, moderator.
Thank you. We have a question from Mia Rapson from the Canadian Press. Press. Please go ahead. Your line is now open.
Good morning, Prime Minister. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the capacity of the civil service to deliver things like employment insurance. We saw record numbers of people applying for EI this week and lots of people saying they couldn't get through on the phones, they don't know how to apply. How, with everybody working at home or so many working from home and so many applications, is the government going to be able to manage this?
We recognize that we need to do things that are absolutely unprecedented in terms of getting money out the door into the pockets of Canadians who need it. We have many different programs and many different tools that are designed to do that in normal times. In these exceptional uncertain times, we're having to take new measures and create new measures to be able to deliver for Canadians who need it right now. Our civil servants are working extraordinarily hard to ensure that's possible, but it's not just about delivering existing programs to far more people. It's about actually simplifying both the process around application and delivery to be able to get money to the people who need it in this exceptional circumstance. I want to thank all public servants, not just at the federal level, but at provincial levels as well, who are working incredibly hard, many of them from home, to ensure that we're able to hold on as a country as we get through these difficult times. We will continue to use various measures in order to get money out to people through many of the things that we have in place already, but we're also looking at new things, and the civil service is an essential part of flowing that. Merci beaucoup tout le monde.
And that is Prime Minister Justin Trudeau on this Saturday morning, giving Canadians an update from his home at Rideau Cottage. A couple of important messages there that I'll go through with my colleague, Vashi Kapellas, host of Power and Politics. Let's start with the repatriation question, Vashi, because that seems to be the newest bit of information. Knowing that one of the first flights, because we know there have been several others done already, but a first flight from Morocco arriving back in Montreal tonight.
Yes, and arriving back tonight, and then an announcement from the Prime Minister that the federal government is working with airlines to try and secure flights from other locations where we know a high number of Canadians are trapped. And he actually mentioned that the number of Canadian citizens as one of the factors in determining where those flights will go and come from. He mentioned two places in particular, Peru and Spain. My understanding is there is the potential for Portugal as well. The difference, again, today from what we heard when he announced, for example, the flight coming back from Morocco, is we don't have an exact timetable. He seemed to indicate it would happen as soon as possible, but we don't know exactly when those flights would land or when they would come back. I think it's important to note for our viewers that the reason these locations are being identified as by the government first is because these are the places where the borders have really shut down, where you're not allowed to get in or out. It sounds also, I think it's important to note for people who are watching, because they can be watching CBC now outside of Canada, and if you are wondering about these flights, they will still be commercial flights. So these are agreements that the government is working on, first with Air Canada, but perhaps with other airlines as well. You will have to pay for this flight. However, it's difficult to determine what the exact cost will be. A couple things to take into account. The flight is flying over there empty. So not a normal flight. That ups the cost for the airline as well. However, the Prime Minister did indicate that they are working with airlines. My understanding is they will subsidize them to a certain degree. I don't have an exact number in order to make those costs, quote unquote, reasonable. I still don't know exactly what reasonable means, but they are efforting at least to try and mitigate the costs for people who are trying to get out.
Yeah, well, I mean, if we look at the Morocco flight, for instance, it was about $1,300. That sounds reasonable to me, because I know there were other people trying to get flights when the world was sort of shutting down at a rapid pace, and it seemed like airlines were jacking up the flights. So I guess if it seems reasonable, depending on where you are. I'll just mention the instance of Peru, because as you say, Vashi, this is about places where borders are really shutting down. And in fact, Peru's Minister of Defense said that as of tomorrow, Peru will no longer support any repatriation efforts by foreign governments. The border shut down last weekend for 15 days. So I would imagine these conversations are ongoing. That doesn't necessarily mean we won't get a plane in. It just means that it's a lot more complicated to get a plane in.
Yeah, definitely. And I think Peru is definitely one of those spots that we should be focused on to a degree, because we know there's at least 800 Canadians. I'm getting messages during this broadcast saying that there could be many more than that. I know that we'll try and get an answer from Foreign Affairs Minister Champagne, who is, by the way, out of isolation because he tested negative for COVID-19 and apparently will be joining the other ministers as we anticipate in about 20 minutes. It will be, you know, I am curious to find out, especially when the number of Canadians is a determining factor for the government's efforts in these instances, how many Canadians are in each jurisdiction. And like you say, I think timing is a big part of all of this, right? We didn't have an exact timeline provided today by the Prime Minister, but if in fact Peru is saying you can't do this tomorrow, I mean, time is obviously, I mean, I feel stupid even saying it, but time is of the essence.
Yeah. Speaking of borders, before I move on to someone who's actually stuck in Peru right now, the extraordinary measure for the Northwest Territories to close its borders later today from travel within Canada. I should tell people that there are no cases in any of the territories, and Northwest Territories has the most number of people of the three. But that too, an unusual move and an unusual maybe message from the Prime Minister when he was asked about that.
Yeah, and he actually mentioned it right off the top and expressed his support for that measure. It's unusual because it almost signals, and I don't know if this will happen in other places, but a latter step of all of this, because what we've seen is over the course of the last week, travel has been limited and you know, keeps on getting more and more limited, non-essential travel. We're now talking about the border between the U.S. and Canada, which basically closed down to any leisure or travel overnight. Will it keep going like this throughout the rest of Canada? I had an opportunity to ask the health minister a few days ago about that, and it actually kind of joins up with another question the Prime Minister got around the Emergencies Act. So when would you need to invoke that? Because they keep telling us it's a last resort. The example Minister Hajdu provided to me as an example of when they might use that act or invoke it is if they had to limit or they had to bar travel between provinces. Now, she insisted that that's a last resort, that they're very far from that, but we do have an indication today that at least in the Northwest Territories, that is something that they are invoking. You know, I think it depends on how things go over the next few days, but it is interesting, you know, will the provinces make those decisions on their own? Will they make them at all? Or will the federal government reach a point where they have to invoke something like that? She seemed to think it was a ways off, but this thing moves so fast, I don't know.
I mean, the situation in the territory is obviously different. They're fairly limited medically in terms of what they can cope with. So if there are no cases there and they can keep people out, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. The Quebec Premier, François Legault, though, was also telling Quebecers, don't travel anywhere. And the Prime Minister essentially said that today, too. It's not just don't travel anywhere. It's don't even bother traveling to another province. Like, this is not the time for that. Staying home is a better option right now.
Yeah, I think the issue is that for a lot of people, unlike you and I, where we're okay to just stay where we are, we can kind of act as though, as you so rightly said, we already have it and sort of amend our behavior for that. Some people who, for example, are bringing food across the country or other goods, trucking or whatever it happens to be, it's a little bit harder, I guess, of a decision for them to have to make, especially when one province is saying something and it's a recommendation here, it's a recommendation there. So again, I will emphasize that ministers have over and over, and the Prime Minister said, using that act is a last resort, and they haven't indicated that they're even close to doing so. I just thought it was interesting that the one example provided when the act might be applicable is shutting down that sort of internal travel.
Okay, Vashi, I'm going to leave it there with you for just a moment. I'll be back to you. As Vashi said, we're standing by for another press conference from a handful of cabinet ministers, including the Minister of Foreign Affairs, who will be asked more questions around that Canadian repatriation effort. And to that end, I want to bring in a guest right now, Greg Bastavros. Hopefully I've got that right, Greg. He's from Mississauga, Ontario. He's one of more than, we think, 800 Canadians. There might be more, trying to get home from Peru. And Greg, I think you're in Cusco, Peru. How are you doing, first of all? How are you doing?
I mean, we're doing what we can with the limited information that we've been provided. As you guys can tell, the situation has continued to change very drastically, very rapidly, prompting, you know, unprecedented decisions that has really put a bind on our ability to get home. We are currently in Cusco. I know that there are 300 to 400 Canadians here in Cusco alone. The figure that you mentioned of over 800 Canadians, we have a Facebook group that we had started 4 days ago that started with 67 people. We're now over 920 people. And from what I understand, there is more than 2,000 or 3,000 people that are not in that group, but they are here in Peru in various places, be it small cities where maybe air travel is restricted, or they're in larger cities such as Cusco or Lima, where they're still on lockdown, on quarantine, where the ability to travel both by road or by boat or by plane has been limited. You know, we have seen, sorry, go ahead.
No, Greg, I was just going to ask you, so I don't know if you heard the Prime Minister there, if you were able to hear him saying that they've got that flight from Morocco and now they're focused on trying to get a flight from Peru and from Spain. What did you make of that? I mean, that must be good news for you.
I mean, it appears to be good news, given what you had said last night, where the defense minister from here in Peru has basically said that as of midnight tonight, or tomorrow, I understand it to be this evening, they are going to stop repatriation efforts. And, you know, I have stayed in this hostel where I have seen my friends from Mexico be repatriated and taken out. I've seen people from Germany be repatriated and taken out. Same thing from people from the US. And we're sitting here kind of wondering, you know, we've followed the instructions that have been provided to us. We encourage a swift action in the same way that it has closed down the borders. We would expect the same level of swiftness from our government to help take care of us and help bring us home safely before matters get worse. You know, we've seen this situation get exponentially worse over the last few days. Yeah. And I think we all fear that although there is this hope that there is arrangements being made, it might be too little too late.
Can I ask, I'm sure lots of Canadians watching you right now are wondering what the heck you're doing there, or when you got there, or why you decided to leave the country. Can you explain a little bit why you're there and why you decided to travel? Yeah.
Yeah, you know, we have a very good friend. I'm here with my fiance. A very good friend of my fiance was actually getting married in Lima. We made this trip all the way back in October of last year, and you know, when we had seen this situation starting to approach, you know, it didn't appear to be quite as serious as it has been over the last 7 to 10 days. We arrived on the 12th, at which the only warning that was provided to us from our government on our travel advisory board was more so based on economic conditions here, but nothing to do with COVID-19, nothing to do with any sort of health regulations. And at that point, you know, we thought that it would be safe to travel. On the Sunday afternoon, we saw that our Foreign Affairs Minister had basically told Canadians to come back as soon as they possibly can before they maybe do not have the option to do so. I can tell you, we tried to book flights, we tried to get home, and there was no flights available, there was no seats available. Things, I think, moved so quickly that, you know, there was only a few people that were able to actually get out of the country before all of this took place.
I should say, let me update some numbers I've just been given from Global Affairs Canada. You're right, there's a lot more Canadians than we have been reporting. They now say that there are 4,300 registered Canadians in Peru. Yes. So I don't know that everybody wants out. That's not assuming that everybody wants out, but there are 4,300 that are there. So tell me, Greg, what kind of communication have you had then from the guy? I assume you've registered with the Global Affairs. What kind of communication have you had now?
You know, we've done our best to reach out to different levels of government, both MP as well as federal. We have followed all of the instructions that have been provided to us by registering with the Registration of Canadians Abroad. And they've basically told us time and time again, you know, sit tight. We are becoming aware of your situation. We're looking to make arrangements to be able to bring you home. And ultimately, that's, I think, what everybody has done is, you know, we've sat tight. We've waited to see what efforts are going to be done by our government, you know, and, you know, yesterday morning, Mexico was able to move 13 buses of people from here in Cusco to a small village, which is 10 or 11 hours away. And they all were able to board flights this morning at 4 a.m. So, you know, was it a glimpse of hope for us? Absolutely. But hearing the update from the defense minister here in Peru saying that repatriation efforts will be halted, we're now wondering, you know, what's going to happen? Time is of the essence, and we're hoping that we see a similar rescue effort that we've seen with Israeli citizens, with Germans, with those from the U.S. as well as those from Mexico, like I mentioned.
How are you doing? How are you and your fiance doing? You know, mentally, health-wise, all those things.
We are healthy. I think mentally, this is very draining and very stressful. I think being kept in the dark and maybe not knowing what exactly is happening on the back end has kept us a little bit more frantic. There's been a lot of activity, a lot of people that I'm sure are suffering with different, medical illnesses or mental illnesses and things like that, that the lack of communication is just helping, make these things much worse. And ultimately, I'm doing my best to maintain positivity and trust in our government. But now hearing this update that the repatriation efforts may come to a halt has put us in a space where we're scared. We want to go home.
We're going to put some of those more specific questions to the Minister of Foreign Affairs in just a few moments when he pops up. But in case he's listening, or the Prime Minister is listening, what would you tell them? What do you need from them?
I think that Canada is a wonderful country. We are very strong. We have great principles and great beliefs. I think that at this point there is a sense of urgency that is necessary to be able to bring us home before these matters become worse. In the last 7 days alone, we have seen 2 24-hour warnings that the borders will become closed. And I think that we as Canadians and our Canadian government needs to act with the same level of swiftness before many of us are left here abroad, be it here in Peru or in Morocco or any of the other countries that find themselves in this kind of situation. Not everybody is maybe eager to get home, but there is a lot of us that want to get home to our families. And the lack of control and the lack of transparency that we've received is scary.
Okay, Greg Bestavros, I think message probably received. Bestavros, thank you. I think message pretty well received there to the government if they're listening. Thank you very much, and my best to you and your fiance. Keep us posted.
Thank you.
He joined us from Cusco, Peru. Let me go back to my colleague Vashi Capellas, who's got some more details on Peru and efforts there.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Rosie, to your question and what Greg was talking about, of course, around what the Peruvian government has said, the defense minister's comments about not allowing repatriation flights. I'm told by a number of sources in the government that they have assurances from people they need assurances from in the Peruvian government that the agreement that they have to land flights and for those flights to actually be able to repatriate Canadians or bring them back, I guess I should say, since they're paying for their own flight, that it still stands. So the impression that the federal government here in Canada has is that they have been given assurances that their operation in Peru, however substantive it ends up being, is still something that will go ahead despite what the defense minister said. So that's what I have from the best sources that I can get at this point. But I know there are a lot of people in Peru watching right now, and that's the message that I'm being given.
Okay, so that's reassuring to them probably that these repatriation efforts, which are complicated with every country, and there are particular complications depending on the cases and the country, some reassurance there that those talks are ongoing. But I would imagine, as you said before, that this has to happen fairly quickly. I'm not sure, how long you can talk to a government that seems quite anxious to just stop all flights entirely.
Yeah, and I think it also puts a timeline. As I keep saying, I'm interested to see when these flights when we start getting some information from the government about when these flights will take place. And I think until I imagine Canadians hear the exact timing of them, there will be a level of nervousness about them happening at all.
Yeah, and then getting to the big cities where you're probably going to need, like Cusco, like Lima, because that's probably where the flights will land. Okay, Vashi, I'm going to leave you there for just a moment as we stand by and wait for the ministers to come out and speak with us and give us some more details of what the Prime Minister announced today. Basically, a few major developments overnight. If you were watching on CBC Television and CBC News Network, the border between Canada and the U.S. is now officially closed temporarily to all non-essential travel. And remember, that is for at least 30 days. There is the option to renew that case. We know that the Northwest Territories is now preventing any travel inside the Northwest Territories. They have no cases, and so they are doing that in a bid to try and make sure that they can contain the virus and not let it into their territory at all. And of course, these repatriation efforts that we're going to hear more about shortly continue on the government's part. The Foreign Affairs Minister, François-Philippe Champagne, having a number of calls with various countries over the course of the past 24 hours to try and allow for flights to land. One landing in Montreal from Morocco tonight, and the government focused now on both Canadians in Spain and Peru, although no details on those flights yet. The number of cases in this country has now exceeded 1,000. 214 were reported on Friday, which was the biggest rise since the pandemic had been declared, and we are still at 13 deaths. Let me go over to BC before these ministers Ministers come up and give us some more details, because in BC, some extreme measures have now been put into place. Restaurants are all being ordered to shutter doors to visitors and switch to takeout and delivery only. Joining me now is Belle Puri in Vancouver. Belle, tell us more about what things are looking like there.
Well, let's review the numbers. At last count, 77 new cases of COVID were announced in BC. That puts us at 348. That's the most cases of any province in the country. 22 people are in hospital and 9 people have died. Now, we'll get an update later today, and you can be guaranteed that those numbers are going to change. Of the 9 deaths, 8 of them are connected to the Lynn Valley Care Centre in North Vancouver, a seniors' home. But now there are 4 seniors' homes in the region that are reporting issues with the virus. The latest is one in the community of Coquitlam. The Dufferin Care Centre has a healthcare worker who has tested positive. Across the province, we're told about 24 healthcare workers are suffering from the coronavirus. We, at this point, have no full shutdown, but that is not sitting well with a group of doctors. One doctor in particular at one of the largest hospitals in Metro Vancouver has penned a letter for health officials, and 60 other doctors have signed with this doctor. They are asking for a complete community shutdown. Their concern is that the numbers are going up too fast, and a lot of people are still taking social distancing far too lightly. And then there are communities that are not part of mainland BC, places like Bowen Island and Haida Gwaii. They are pleading with people, if you don't live here, please don't come here. And as you mentioned, of course, restaurants now are just takeout or delivery, no dining in, and it will be policed. Any restaurant that doesn't heed that order could face prosecution.
Okay, Belle Puri in Vancouver, thanks for giving us a good picture of how things are developing out west. As we've been talking about, an Air Canada plane full of Canadians expected to leave the Casablanca airport very shortly. We've reached Marc Renaud, who will be boarding that flight, along with his wife, Yvonne. Marc, you're in line. How are you feeling about things?
Pretty calm. Everything's moving very smoothly here. The line is moving quickly. We're about to get our boarding passes.
And how difficult was it for you to get on that flight?
Last night it was not that hard, but the week has been an extraordinarily arduous process, because we really didn't have a lot of signals from the embassy regarding how we were going to get home.
And you were there. Tell me the circumstances that brought you to Morocco.
My wife and I are on a 3-week vacation. We're about 2 weeks in, cutting it a week short. It's time to go. There's a curfew here now, military trucks in the streets, and so it's time to go.
Have you been anxious, I guess, or stressed out?
At times, yes. I mean, of course, everything happened very quickly. So the moment at which Canada told everybody to come home, Morocco essentially closed the borders. So there was no time to act. The information we got from the embassy wasn't, like, by the time we had it, it was obsolete. So there were flights apparently leaving from different places, but there were no assurances that borders wouldn't be closed in other countries. We were told to only contact embassy officials if we were in an emergency situation, and we were not exactly. So we just ultimately dropped what we were doing, took a night bus to Casablanca, figuring that this is where international flights leave from to go to Montreal, and we're also close to the embassy in Rabat. That was the plan. So we've been basically here for a number of days, and now we're going.
And I have about 30 seconds. How are you going to feel when you finally get home?
No doubt relieved, and then we'll just be indoors like everyone else, no doubt, is in Canada right now.
There's not a lot going. There's not a lot going on. You're not going to miss out on anything.
It's occurred to me that this might be the biggest group of Canadians in one spot in the whole world right now.
Yes. Stay far away. Stay socially distance yourself in the line if you can. Marc, we're glad that you got a flight out. Happy travels back with you and your wife, and glad you're going to get home safely. And we'll talk again. Thank you very much.
I'm sure everyone here is grateful to the government of Canada for getting us home. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, so it was Marc Renaud, one of the people getting on board that flight from Morocco. 450 people expected back in Canada later tonight. The government announcing today that it is working hard to make efforts to get other Canadians out of countries where they are essentially trapped, focusing on Peru and Spain. We're standing by to bring you an update from cabinet ministers now, but we're going to say goodbye to those of you watching on CBC Television. If you want to continue watching, CBC News Network, cbc.ca. Our coverage continues there. I'm Rosemary Barton.